People on the streets of European cities simply holding a Palestinian flag could be arrested. I didn't believe we'd ever reach this degree of paranoia about simply standing up for the rights of Palestinian people.
Joining centre stage today is Jeremy Corbyn, one of the most polarising figures in modern British politics. Throughout his political career, from being on the political fringe to his tenure as leader of the UK's Labour Party and now as an independent MP, Corbyn has always campaigned for economic justice, peace, and a British foreign policy that tries to atone for its imperial legacy. In this episode, we discuss the price paid for being vocal in supporting and standing in solidarity with Palestine, while Corbyn also speaks about the future of Europe and how the continent may need to unite in the face of a US-led trade war. Jeremy Corbyn, welcome to Centre Stage.
Absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
You've been an advocate for Palestinian statehood for decades. Mm-hmm. What would you say the past 18 months have meant for that fight?
I think the past 18 months has been probably the worst time ever for Palestinian people. And the loss of life in Gaza and increasingly in the West Bank, and not forgetting the plight of people in the refugee camps, has just been truly atrocious. What it has done is awoken the rest of the world to the plight of Palestinian people. So in a perverse kind of way, it's probably meant that Palestinian recognition more universally is probably nearer now than it was. But that's on the back of at least 60,000 deaths, and the blockade of Gaza now gone on for over 50 days. No water, no food, no power, no medicines, nothing for 50 days. And so I find an element in my mind of disgust at the way in which the world's powers, including Britain, have continued supplying weapons to Israel, knowing full well that they're in breach of international law and bombing civilian targets in Gaza.
You mentioned the position of the British government. You've been demanding an inquiry into what you describe as complicity. What would that inquiry achieve? What would that investigation reveal? Would it bring justice?
The reason I put it forward is this. I was very involved in opposition to the Iraq war, and we believed all along that the war was A, illegal, and B, based on utterly false information. The allegations that Iraq, for example, held weapons of mass destruction. And at the end of the conflict, we demanded a public inquiry, and that inquiry took a long time and came out with a huge document which indicated deficiencies in the decision-making process, false information, and the inadequate legal advice. And so what I've demanded is now an inquiry into the British government's policies in relation to the supply of arms to Israel and diplomatic support they've given to Israel. The reason I've done that is that we've seen the case that South Africa took to the International Court of Justice, and that court gave its opinion that acts of a genocidal nature are taking place. The International Criminal Court followed that up with arrest warrants, including 3 arrest warrants, but one particularly for Benjamin Netanyahu. And yet throughout all this, Britain continued supplying some arms to Israel. David Lammy eventually said they were going to suspend some of the arms licenses, 30 out of the 300 that Britain had at the time. We still don't know what those licenses really are. Weapons are still being supplied, and the Royal Air Force Base in Cyprus, Akrotiri, is also being used as a staging point. And we also are aware that 15% of the total number of components of every F-35 jet are made in Britain. They couldn't fly without the British parts. They're still being supplied. And the government's response is that they abide by international humanitarian law, but they can't upset the global supply chain of the F-35 because they don't know which parts go to which country. I'm sorry, that's just utter nonsense. It's just nonsense. They know exactly where every single one of those parts goes. Those industries are very well organised and very careful on their record keeping. And so, since there's been no answer, I've then written to the Prime Minister publicly, and I've got the support of a lot of members of Parliament of almost all parties in signing this letter demanding an inquiry. So far, interestingly, there's been no formal response, which is interesting. It hasn't been rejected. Now, I'm not predicting that's all going to go through straight away. It's not. It's building up the campaign. We need to know the truth. And the people of Britain need to know that their country is complicit in this.
Your position with regards to Palestinian rights has also meant quite a lot of very aggressive political backlash for you. Would you say your position was ever misunderstood or distorted?
Distorted and grievously misunderstood. I've been to Palestine on 9 occasions. I've been in all parts of Palestine. I've been in Israel as well. I've been in Jordan. I've been in the refugee camps. It's not as if I don't come to this position without some knowledge on the ground of it all. The most disgraceful accusations were thrown at me that I held anti-Semitic views. I absolutely do not. I work with many Jewish organizations that are also appalled at what's going on in Palestine. The issue is human rights and justice and a humanitarian approach to issues around the world. And last year, the Labour Party decided that I wasn't apparently a fit person to be a member of Parliament any longer.
Was that hurtful?
Yeah, I joined the Labour Party when I was 16. I spent my whole life in the Labour Party. I've held every position there is to hold in the Labour Party, from a street collector through to leader of the party. And for them, the new leadership to then, less than a year later, after I'd stepped down as leader, do that to me.
Did you think of giving up altogether?
No, never. Never. Why would I give up? It's not about me personally. It's about the arguments, it's about the issues, and it's about the principles. And I feel what we did in my constituency in Islington North last July was to show that there are people who are prepared to listen to a voice for justice and humanity. And we won that election. I'm very proud of that result.
I want to go back to the backlash, because being critical of Israeli government policy these days can have very serious, sometimes devastating consequences for everyone, for people. People have lost their jobs, they've lost visas, they've lost their freedom. Did you ever think that it would come to that?
No, I didn't. Not in the slightest. I did not believe we'd ever get to the situation where people on the streets of European cities holding a Palestinian flag, well, or anywhere else in the world, America for that matter, simply holding a Palestinian flag, which is a UN-recognised entity, shall we say, could be arrested. I didn't believe we'd ever reach this degree of paranoia about simply standing up for the rights of Palestinian people. And so I think it's important that we all speak out on it. And the demonstrations around the world have shown that despite what some of the world's media do, despite what mainly Western European and North American governments do, the majority of the world's population are with the Palestinian people. And through the Progressive International, we have set up the Hague Group, of UN member states. There's 9 joined initially, led by Brazil, South Africa, Malaysia, to adhere to the rulings of the ICJ and the ICC and form a group within the UN to push for that. But what's happened now with South Africa, the United States putting extraordinary tariffs on South Africa, very, very critical of the South African government on everything, but really it's because of their attitude towards Palestine.
But isn't it staggering that you have to go and form a group of countries within the UN to actually follow the court's decisions? It's like, what does that tell us about global order and international law?
What it shows is that the powerful, particularly the United States, but they're not alone in this, really do not want or like international law. The US has never signed up to the International Criminal Court, and I don't think it ever will. But what it shows is something very dangerous about the idea of international law. I mean, I was born late 40s. I grew up in that post-war consensus period where international law meant something, where the United Nations was seen as the great hope. And we now see the United Nations underfunded, inadequate, and lacking authority and power to actually deal with things. So the UN has not managed to bring about a ceasefire in Gaza or the West Bank, has not managed to bring about a ceasefire in Ukraine, has not managed yet to bring about an effective peace settlement in Yemen, Congo, or Sudan. And
Is it losing its credibility?
Its lack of power, lack of ability is a real problem. So there's two factors I think we need to look at here. One is what is influencing those governments. Think of how much money has been made out of Palestine, Ukraine, Sudan, Yemen, Congo, by global arms companies, all of which are based in Western Europe or North America. Don't think there isn't an arms industry pressure also in China and Russia, but that's of a different order compared to that of the USA. So that's part of it. The other side of it, which gives me some hope, is the numbers of people that have been involved in publicly going out and demonstrating their support for Palestine. In Britain, I estimate more than 1 million people at various times in the past 18 months have taken part in public activities in support of Palestine. That's a lot of people for a country that doesn't have a tradition of mass demonstrations.
And as you said, in a dark way, this particular onslaught of Gaza has made more people aware of what the Palestinians have been going through for the past 70 plus years, not only for the past 18 months.
Exactly. Too much of it is put in the narrative. It all started in October 23. No, it didn't. It's been going on for a very long time in various forms, sometimes more vicious than others, but it has been going on. But I think where a lot of the global media have missed out is on what's happening in the West Bank at the same time. Gaza does get, through the bravery of journalists such as in your channel, does get coverage, whereas the West Bank basically until recently is not. And so there is clearly an Israeli strategy of destroying the Palestinian villages on the West Bank, increasing the power of the occupation forces and of the settlement policy. The ICJ rulings were not just about genocide, they were also about the illegality of the occupation at all.
You mentioned the United States. What do you think the return of Donald Trump will mean for this crisis, but also for the future of Palestinians?
Well, I don't think the result of the US election would make much difference either way. Kamala Harris had very, very pro-Israeli views also. And she and the Biden administration, of which she was part, had supplied enormous numbers of weapons.
But she wasn't talking about developing a sea resort in Gaza, right? I guess
then Trump takes it a stage further and announces that he wants to expel the entire population from Gaza, shift them somewhere else. Now, that's got a complete kickback, but the US economic power over all of the neighboring states is absolutely huge, particularly the money they put in to Egypt and other countries is so enormous. So Trump's election has been disastrous for the Palestinian people, that's for sure.
What about more broadly? The return of Donald Trump to the White House has meant that every day there are either new tariffs or antagonistic statements about several issues. Europe is in a very difficult position. Do you think there could be, I don't know, an opportunity here for Europe to stand on its own, or will it have to align with US interests?
I think we're going to look back on this period of 2025 in years to come as being a period of sort of unbelievable levels of absurdity, when the president of the US goes into the Rose Garden and reels off a whole list of tariffs he's going to put on to places and announce that this is going to make America great again. In reality, the tariff policy will do what? Damage supply chains, damage US manufacturing capability, lead to inflation and probably a depression in the United States. But it will also actually realign the world's economies in a way that he doesn't want and probably couldn't have predicted. And so the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and those that have more recently joined, will become more important and will become a global source of trading and will build their own currency as well.
So do you think it will backfire?
Yeah, so the backfire is going to be that US influence in the world will be much less. Now, the question about Europe economically, Trump is not really very interested in relations with anybody else. He's only interested in the US to a great extent. And that means that Europe has then got to think a bit more about its role. It's going to have to build a trading relationship with the southern countries and with those countries, particularly Canada and Mexico, as well as the BRICS nations, rather than depending everything on trade with the United States. The response so far by the European Union has been beyond disappointing. It's been devastating, where Ursula von Leyen now proposes that Europe become a defense superpower, spends more and more money on weapons and manufacturing weapons. For what? Is it to continue a war, the Cold War, with Russia rather than searching for a way to end the Ukrainian conflict? Or is it about interventions in Africa where you think strategically 20, 30, 50, 100 years' time, the continent with the most mineral resources is Africa? And that is why the interests are increasingly moving into military interventions in Africa. So I think we need to look at this as a sort of global point.
You have been very critical throughout your career also of British foreign policy, especially in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Would you say the UK has had the opportunity to reckon with its colonial past, or has it been playing imperial games by other means?
There's something in the European psyche in which the principle of empire has never gone away. I'll give you an example. Whenever there's a crisis somewhere in Africa or anywhere else in the world, and the European Union starts thinking, well, how will we react to this crisis? What do but reach for the former colonial power? So if something happens in Niger, in Senegal, Mali, so on, France must deal with that. Mm-hmm. If it's Nigeria, the British can do that. It's like the colonial mentality has never gone away. And in Britain, I think there is still a huge imperial mentality in the thought processes within foreign policy, in the processes within the military, and increasingly, ever since Johnson changed the strategy which had been adopted for 50 years of ending the global role of Britain militarily, Britain now seems to think that by spending so much on defence, we can have a global role. And so this thinking has led to the government in the past month announcing £5 billion cut in disability benefits in order to increase defence expenditure. So that means we are impoverishing people with disabilities, retaining a benefit cap on the poorest children in our society in order to pay for more bombs and weapons. Europe is becoming more and more, instead of the prosperous, equality-driven continent it was intended to be, is becoming more and more socially and economically divided as we spend more and more on weapons of war. And that cannot be good for the future.
Going back to the situation in the Middle East right now, the Israeli government has insisted that it will fight until victory. Seeing the pictures of Gaza today, The levels of destruction are staggering, unprecedented. What will victory look like?
And I remember a joyous visit to a school in Jabalia refugee camp some years ago, before the intensity of the fighting has got worse. And I remember meeting the children in this school and talking to them about their lives. They showed me their artwork, they read me their poetry, and it was a lovely visit. I spent quite a lot of time there. Then we went onto the roof of the school, and from the roof of the school you can see the fence. You can see the machine gun emplacements. You can see where they can't go. And to the north, you can see Ashkelon. However, these children were getting the best education that UNRWA could give them. And they were full of hope and full of optimism. That school is rubble. What happened to the children, I had no idea. And I've been to the universities in Gaza City and so on. All of that is now destroyed. So even if there was a complete end to the whole conflict tomorrow, you've got basically 2 million people with no homes to live in, no water, no sanitation, and a mental health crisis. And so the trauma will never, ever go away. And it does require that Israel withdraws. It does require that a huge amount of money is provided to the Palestinian people to rebuild Gaza in their image, not Donald Trump and golf courses and resorts and all this nonsense. Gaza was traditionally a very productive place. It was the home of fresh fruit, home of vegetables, delightful strawberries, farming projects. They were doing really well in Gaza. And they were trying to make Gaza self-sufficient in fresh fruit and vegetables. And so all that is now just destroyed and deliberately done by Israel, deliberately financed and sanctioned by the USA and Western Europe.
We're coming to the end of this interview, and I want to ask you about a look back at your career. We're coming up to 50 years of public service, if I'm not mistaken.
You're going to give people my age next, aren't you?
No, I won't. I'll stop here. But I did speak to one of your constituents, and she volunteered in your campaign last year. And she told me this. She said the main impact of the Corbyn era was that the thought of real change didn't seem far away, mainly due to the fact that the man that was supposed to change everything for us was one of us, and the whole movement was focused on the collective. Is that how you want people, history, to remember you?
I spent my life obviously politically active and active in trade unions, but also active in trying to ensure that people don't get forgotten and left behind. But there are a huge number of people all over Western Europe that are looking for an alternative, which is of peace, which is of social justice, which is of environmental sustainability, which isn't the politics of condemning people all the time. It's the politics of trying to include and inspire people. And so new political organizations are growing up all across Europe. The future is in our hands. It doesn't have to be run by the minority of global corporations. It doesn't have to be run by the arms trade. Technology doesn't have to be our enemy. It can be something that gives us opportunity and empowerment. But above all, why should we be destroying this planet, condemning so many people to a life of the most desperate poverty, and at the same time spending last year $2.4 trillion on weapons of destruction all around the world? Come on, guys, we can do it differently and do it better. That's my life's work, and it's not stopped.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you so much for joining us here on Center Stage.
My pleasure.